Hello and welcome back to the channel. So in the last video I managed to pretty much sort the air suspension. I think it's pretty much there. It is raised at the back quite high, but I'm hoping once I reconnect the battery it'll sort itself out. So I'm going to move on to problems with the engine, and it's throwing up two fault codes, and both of them are for the EGR valves. There's two on this, one on the left, one on the right bank, and they're probably really suttered up. So I'm going to hopefully take them off and clean them up and put them back, and then they'll be okay, hopefully. Whilst I've got most of the top of the engine off, I'm also going to have a look at the EGR cooler, because I think oil is getting into the coolant, and there could be a number of reasons for that. But the EGR cooler gasket does fail on these, so I'm going to have a look at that to see if that's an issue as well. Let's go. Right, so I've already disconnected some stuff. So the air box and the air filter, I've taken them out. I've also taken some of the pipework that goes from the air box to the induction system on the engine. I've taken that off as well, just because it was easy, gives me better access. So then started to disconnect all the connectors. I can see the electrical connectors. I've started disconnecting all of them, because all of this needs to come off, because underneath here are the EGR valves and the EGR cooler, so all this needs to come off. These are in my way at the minute, and these are coolant hoses, so I'm going to drain the coolant next. It needs to come out anyway because it's horrible, it's got oil in it, I'm sure. So I'm going to drain that next, then I can disconnect these, move them out of the way, and then try and get to more wires and whatever else is holding all this on. I've also made a balls up right from the go, because these struts, gas struts, were squeaking and they were annoying every time I opened and closed the bonnet. So I got a little bit of WD-40 and wiped them all over. Now they don't work at all, so I think I've destroyed the seals inside. So top tip, don't wipe these down with any kind of solvent like that, because it will destroy them. So I've jacked the car up just on the one side, passenger side, and I need to get to the bottom of the radiators. I think there's two places to drain down the coolant system. I need to remove this. There's a couple of bolts here, but it's underneath this, so I need to take this off first. I think there's 1, 2, 3, 4, there's probably about 6 bolts, so I need to undo those, then undo this. So will that just slide out? Oh, come on. Ooh, yes. Right, using my deductive powers. I'm not too sure what this is. I'm hazarding a guess. It's an oil cooler of some kind, because we've got, if it's cooler, it needs coolant, so that's not going to be these lines. Probably the oil comes in and out, and then it's cooled by the coolant coming in and then out. Now this has got some sort of retaining clip. It does spin, so I reckon if I undo that, pull that off, we should get all the coolant come out. I need to undo the reservoir at the top, so that air is allowed to get into the system and it can drain down. I think this is the bleed screw, so I'll undo that as well. Alright, so I've got a drain pan ready. I'm hoping this just lets go. Actually, that coolant doesn't look too bad, which will be a massive relief. I was expecting it to come out looking like tar. So this is inside the coolant reservoir, and it's pretty black. It doesn't look brilliant. So I'm going to have to probably remove this and clean it out with something. Sit rep. I have disconnected the left hand side. This plate had to come out, that was down there. It's sort of mounted to these bits here with these nuts. There's 3 along the top, 4 along the bottom, and 2 of these I accessed from the wheel arch, and the back 2 I got down there with an extension. So they're disconnected, they're the injector connectors. These are numbered as well, 1, 2, 3, 4, and the numbers are on the manifolds themselves, plastic manifold. So I don't need to label them up, which is good. I managed to remove the bracket, this bracket that sits underneath this harness, and all the various connectors mount to that, so that's off. On the right hand side, I've managed to get the front two injector connectors off, but because I can't get this plate out, it's just so tight, I can't get the back two off. But I think that's okay, because I can just move these out of the way as I try and take off this inlet kind of manifold cover thing. On the front, I've disconnected everything except for one lead, this lead here, that goes way down there. There's a connector which goes underneath this coolant hose, and then another lead that goes way down there. So before I need to take those off, I'm going to try and avoid it. I'm hoping I can just move all these out of the way. So now I need to take this off. I've undone these bolts at the front, so there's a little bit of movement in there now. But then this is an EGR, this goes for the EGR valve back into this kind of inlet manifold system. So there's two bolts I need to take out there. There's another bolt at the back, just here, I think. And then I need to disconnect these hoses here. Hopefully that should be enough to then lift this out, because the EGR valves live down there. Maybe I'll get the back out first. It's a faff, but it is possible to get that out without disconnecting too much from the front and down there. So this is the EGR valve, and then behind it here we've got some kind of cooler, so the exhaust gases come into here. We've got some cooler hoses in and out, so that cools the hot exhaust gases into the EGR valve, and that then decides whether or not to introduce those hot gases back into the inlet system. So we've got a bolt here which I've removed. There's one underneath which I have no idea how I'm going to get to. There was a bolt back here which is gone, and one down there which is also gone. I now need to remove this bracket here which is attached to the fuel rail. Remove that. Now I could disconnect it from here, but I'm going to have a real problem getting to the bolt down there. And from what I've read online, if I disconnect this bolt here, and then there's a bolt at the back here and one below, but I should be able to get access because there's a bit of room at the back, and then I can remove these coolant hoses. Then I can remove all of this and hopefully take that out. So bracket off, undo that bolt, undo those bolts, try and undo the bolt underneath here, like this one. It should just come out. Hey! So I've just got that back bolt out from here. So there's a bolt here and a bolt here. That's all that was holding this on, it would seem. Oh, and one here and one down here. But there isn't one under here, which I was really worried about. So that's all loose now. So it's just these two coolant hoses and the two bolts at the back. Right, so I don't know if you can see this, but I've got the socket extension on the lower bolt, the opposite one to this one, just here. I've just managed to get it on. It was tricky, and you think it's directly straight down underneath, but it isn't. It feels like it's off to the right hand side slightly, so I was missing it a lot. I've already got the top one out and dropped it down somewhere. I can't find it. That's a problem. My problem now is that as this comes out, how am I going to get this bolt line back up? But that's a problem for later. Release from the back. Let's get these coolant hoses off. Oh, yeah, let's see. So here it is. So this is the EGR valve itself. Got a motor in here, and then this is like a cooler. So we've got coolant running in here, and this is where the exhaust gases come in, and then they come out when this opens up, I'm guessing. So I'm going to disconnect the cooler from it first. So it's a little bit sooty, but you can see right the way through there. It's not blocked or anything like that, so it's far less sooty than I was expecting it to be. And again here, this is a lot less sootier. It's got some soot on there, but it's nowhere near as caked up as I thought it would be. So I think I'm going to test this. This should rise up out of here when we put some power to this. And what I've done is I've got this makeshift 12 volt source of power here. I'm going to put to it. So 12 volts on here. Now inside the connector there's 5 pins, but 2 of which are wider than the others, so I'm guessing they're the ones that carry current. So I'm going to put some power to this and hopefully something happens. Right, so that comes up and down very easily as it's supposed to. It's not blocked up at all, which is worrying because the car was flagging up an error on both sides, so I'm wondering if there's a connection issue because these are clearly actuating. There's no fault I can see there. So with the EGR valve kind of working, I've put that to one side for now because the reason it's flagging up an electrical error must be electrical because the motor is actuating. I took the second EGR valve out and that's working fine as well. So I'm going to have a think about that. One other job I wanted to do while I was in here is have a look at this, because this is an oil cooler, I think. So engine oil comes up into here, coolant comes up into here and it cools the engine coolant. Now I think these can fail, and then when they do, you start getting oil and coolant mixing, which I have. So this is a prime suspect. There are other reasons why that could happen, but this is a lead suspect. So the oil filter and its housing and the oil cooler and whatever that is at the back of it all sit on an assembly at the bottom, but I don't need everything off. This oil cooler does unbolt from the bottom via these, I think, 7 bolts all the way around it. So I'm going to try and take that off. I think I'm going to undo this hose because that's in my way. I'm going to undo that. I'm going to undo these sensors as well, and then this hose at the top, and see if I can get to all the bolts. So all these 8mm bolts are undone. They don't want to come all the way out. Something's kind of keeping them in, which is fine. So the last one here is a Torx. So that is some kind of crap. So obviously underneath here we've got coolant and oil, and fuel seems to be going in and out the top. I wonder if that's one way it cools it. It looks, obviously, as I've taken it off, there's been fluids in here, so it's likely overspilled into some other areas, but it looks like we've got an oil side. Crap. It looks like we've got an oil side and a coolant side. Now on first inspection it doesn't look like there's been any mixing in here. Difficult to tell, but there's a gasket, probably 3, so we've got one around the oil side, one around the coolant side and one here. Now obviously I'm going to replace these. They don't look terrible, but I will take these out and replace them. Right, so here we have the oil cooler. So underneath we've got 3 ports, and on the top we've got 1 port here, and then I don't know if this is fuel going in and out here. I don't know if the fuel helps cool whatever's going on in here or needs cooling, I don't know, but that definitely sounds like fuel coming out of these. Obviously coolant going in or out of this one, and then coming out of in or out of this one, and then we've got some oil ports here going in one way, coming out the other. So on the face of it, when you have a look at the sealing surfaces, it doesn't seem too bad. Now naturally as I took it off, oil's poured out, so you can see where it's been pouring out, but the actual seal seems to have been doing its job. I'm not sure that was what was or could have been causing oil getting into coolant. Another reason why that might have been happening is inside here is a complex lattice of, or network of pipes if you like, and now as the coolant goes in, it's obviously circulating round the oil on a separate system, separate pipes, and is effectively a heat exchanger. Now if those pipes have holes in or they corrode over time, then you can get leakage there. So what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to block off this coolant port here. I'm going to fill up this side with water, and then the theory being, if I stand that flat, that water level shouldn't drop. If there's any leaks or inside any holes or anything where it can leak, that coolant level or the water level will drop. So I'm going to do that, and we'll see how it performs. I've decided to use white spirit instead of water, and I'm not sure if I've blocked off the bottom well enough, but here we go. Got some air bubbles coming up, but it could just be settling. Right, so it has been a few hours, and this level, the white spirit, hasn't gone down at all, which is really positive because it means that this unit is fine. It doesn't need replacing. So I'm going to get this back in the car, get the seals back on, the new ones, and get this back on the car, and give it a clean up around the area because there's some like aluminium corrosion and stuff. So yeah. Okay, so I've cleaned up the area as much as possible, including the seats and where these seals sit into. They're as clean as I can get them. Now, full disclosure, I've been really struggling to find anywhere to buy these seals from. I found one or two places, but the price was incredible for what these are. So I am putting the old seals back in. They look fine. I've given them a clean. There's no splits, no sign of wear really. So I'm putting them back in with a little bit of help with some RTV sealant, just to help it out a little bit. I wouldn't be doing this if I thought the coolant and the oil were mixing. I don't believe they are, because they both seem, well, black is black and coolant is coolant as far as I can see. So I'm putting these back in. Hopefully this won't come back to bite me. So here's the oil cooler. I have cleaned this surface up with some Scotch-Brite, which hasn't done a bad job actually, but if I had a mill I would skim the surface, but I don't, so I won't. I'm going to put this back, snug the bolts up a little bit, give the sealant, the RTV sealant, an hour to firm up a bit, and then I'll tighten it down, and then I'm going to have to leave it for 24 hours for it to cure before I can run the engine. So I'm going to pretty much put this back, reassemble everything, and then I've got a couple more things I want to do before I fill it up with fluids and start it, and that's, I'm going to do an oil change, an oil filter change, and also I need to remove the coolant reservoir and clean that out, and also replace the fill level sensor on that. So that's everything back together. I just need to put the airbox back on. I'm going to put a new filter in while I do that. Everything seems to have gone back okay. I think some of the cable routing isn't original, but it shouldn't interfere with anything. I have snapped one of the vacuum lines, so I'm going to have to take that up for now. And this seems to go nowhere, so I'm going to have to look back at the footage and see where that came from. This is another vacuum line, no idea where it goes. But everything else is back together. So it's got no coolant in it. I'm going to put some water in it and make sure that's all ran with water to flush things through. I'll drop that, then I'll put the coolant in. But before that, I'm going to take out the coolant reservoir and then clean this and put a new sensor in there, coolant level sensor. Come on. There we go. Getting that bottom hose off was a nightmare. How I'm going to get that back on, I do not know. And I've also disconnected the sensor from the bottom. Ugh. So I've cleaned this up as much as I can, and it's well, it's not much better, to be honest. I've used everything on it I can find: Ferroliquid, heavy duty degreaser, Mr. Muscle oven cleaner, which has always worked well for me, but it's not cleaned this up much at all. But it's all intact, it's all there, nothing's broken, so I'm going to reuse it. It smells like scrapyard. So in the bottom we've got a bit of a fill level sensor, and I've got a replacement one for this. It is throwing up a coolant level issue inside, so I'm thinking the sensor's duff. So for £6 I've just gone and bought a new one. So I'll replace this
and get it back in the car. Bloody hell. And that's what it should sound like, and that's the old one. Don't know how well you can see that, but on the right is the original one, on the left is the eBay one, and they look almost identical, except this one's got a much sharper, I don't know what you call that, flangey bit. This one is much more rounded, and that clips in just fine, that one doesn't. Annoyingly, I've had to put the old sensor back in because the new one doesn't fit. So I'm going to have to get a proper part. Now I am going to put water in here the first time I start it up, get all that running round, and then drain it out again. So I'm not too fussed about taking this out now. I know how to do it. So I'm going to put this back in, put some water in it and see if it starts. Right, so the water bottle's back in. Hoses are on. I'm going to fill it up, see what happens. Got the bleed valve nipple thing open as well, so as soon as I see water coming out of there I'll shut it off, check for leaks, and then start it and see what it does. So reconnecting the battery. So we've got some bubbling over, which, you know, I kind of expected. The system's going to bleed itself. Main thing I'm looking for are leaks from any of these hoses really that I've had off. Now I am losing daylight, but I think I'm going to drive it out. I can hear the air compressor going, and it's never really had chance to settle, so I'm going to drive it out to see if it helps. Ever since I've had the car, the air suspension's never worked, and I've done a previous couple of videos on the air suspension, but I'd press the raise button on the air suspension, nothing would happen. And I can hear the air compressor doing stuff now. I've just pressed it inside to raise the car, and it said raising. And now it says in off-road height, which is brilliant, and it is in off-road height, front and back. So that's great. I've got the heater on inside to full, so that's going to help bleed the system. I'll check the levels in a minute. But yeah, I think that's a success, hopefully. I didn't get a chance to replace the coolant level sensor because the new one I got didn't fit. So I'm going to have to get a genuine or OEM part there and put that back on at some point, unless the fault's gone away. But just dead quick, I'm going to see if the EGR faults are still there. They were codes I could never get rid of. And when I took the EGR valves off, they worked. They weren't clogged up, so I don't know what's going on there. But let's have a look to see if the codes have been cleared. Right, so it's now, I've plugged my OBD2 kind of diagnostic tool in, and it's scanning all 28 modules it can scan. Now when I started the car earlier, there were no lights on the dash, no warnings or anything. And I've been through and cleared every fault code on every module. Whether it had one or not, I just went through and cleared the lot. Let's see what it comes up with, if anything. So read fault code, no codes found, which is brilliant. So there are no fault codes showing up on the diagnostic tool, and there are no warnings on the dash, which is really weird because when I started this, I was going for two things. I was going for the EGR valve faults that I couldn't get rid of on this diagnostic thing, and was what was probably flagging up an engine management light, and then also the low coolant, which when there was coolant in there, it was still flagging up a low coolant thing. Both faults have now gone, and yet I didn't really find a problem. I've just taken things apart, removed them and put them back. So they may appear again one day, I don't know, but fingers crossed they won't. But I'm going to call this job done for now. So I think next is going to be the rear lights, something a bit more accessible and straightforward. So I've got one light to replace, and I've got to remove the tint off the other light. So I think that's next. And then probably after that, it's the god-awful grinding coming from the back of the car somewhere. I don't know if that's brakes or diff. So see you in the next one.